Hi, peace of Christ. Good morning, as it is here. We're excited to start some of these new videos, which we've never done before. But this one, we wanted to come and just tell you a little bit about our thoughts as we think about gathering during this time of COVID and the pandemic. And the pastors have been talking a lot through many different seasons. And so this new announcement around what we're going to do during the summer season is what this video is going to cover. What is it that Aaron puts on the top of our liturgy things? Summer COVID liturgies or something. It's for that time, which will sort of take us through until the end of August. Is that right? Through the prophets.
Yeah.
So we did want to talk to you a little bit. We've been using a sort of fourfold rubric, and it was from a pastoral panel that I listened through Gravity Leadership. Shout out to them. Juliet was on that panel. It's worth listening to if you are thinking about it and want to know more about how some of these decisions are being sorted through. But for us, we really liked this framework, and it had 4 different components sort of progressively moving through questions for our community around what it means to gather, what we should be thinking about. So for us, those are, number 1, is it ethical to gather? And number 2, is it legal? Number 3, is it missional or part of what God is doing here? And number 4, is it practical? Can we actually logistically pull it off? So John, why don't you maybe talk us through those first 2? How are we thinking about, is it ethical, and then is it legal?
Yeah, right. Yeah, and I mean, the core question, of course, is, and I know there are some folks in the community who have asked or are thinking, like, should we be gathering back at the Commons on Sunday morning? We're in phase 4, so this is the legal part, right? Like, we're now allowed up to 50 people. That would mean we could probably sort that out, for peace, have signups. 2/3 or 75% or so of the community could be in one place at the same time. And so is it legal to do so? The answer now is yes. And so I think there's rightfully some questions of like, well, why aren't we meeting back together again? We've seen other places where churches frankly have filed lawsuits against the state to make it legal. And then once it's legal, they meet, right? And so here we're in a position where it is legal and we're choosing not to meet altogether. We're meeting in these smaller gatherings in backyards. And so, but for that part of the framework, yes, for now, it is legal. Illinois' positivity rate is low. It's 4.3% right now where we are. It is certainly starting to tick back up. And I think all of us share a concern that the virus is kind of off the rails in the US. And so we could see a place even in Illinois later this fall where it's no longer illegal, but at least for right now it is. So that brings us to the second one, like, is it ethical? This is a complicated question because we know that being out of community, being apart from each other, has its own like negative ethics, right? And as pastors, like we've seen, there are not a small number of families who have opted out of Zoom gatherings, are opting out of Sunday morning gatherings. We certainly want those folks to be, as we were, talking about rhythms before, Gene, we want people to be in regular worship. And so we struggle with the ethics of like, okay, we're not doing what is normal for us. And in changing what is normal, some families have decided not to participate, to no longer engage in the community that way. And so there is an ethical piece there of like, well, maybe we should go back to what is normal, because as worship sort of falls out of the rhythms of people's lives, that creates challenges in allegiance to following Jesus. But on the other side, we have folks in our community who are immunocompromised, are awaiting surgery, are quite concerned about the physical risk to themselves of gathering in larger groups. And we largely see those people opting in to the small group gatherings and to the Zoom gatherings. And so, as has been our sort of ethical posture all along, we believe the right response for us in this place and time is to preference the needs of those who are sort of more, more needy or more vulnerable around this particular issue, and that it's appropriate for the rest of the community to kind of shape themselves a little bit around that. I think it's not the only ethical concern. I mean, I do think the ethics of, even if it is legal, the ethics of putting people in groups and what we're seeing that means for communities across the country as larger groups gather does make me think that the larger ethical issue is troubled as well. But that's two. It is legal. We think the ethical question is gray, but we're tending towards it's probably not the most ethical to gather all together right now.
Sure. And then, so that brings us to the last, the third, which is missional. And when we say that, we really mean how is what the Spirit is doing in this time and this place being represented? And if we are meeting, what is the way that God is inhabiting our community in this special way in Westmont and our neighbors? And for us, I think some of the things that we were thinking through and what was really surprising and convicting to me was the real beauty that has been born out of these backyard liturgy gatherings, these conversations around people learning to do the core practices that we've committed to as a community, which is proclaiming the gospel to one another. It's given us this season where we can sort of on the ground learn what that looks like and practice it with different people. And because our groups sort of mix every week, that provides different ability for us to hear the gifting of one another. I think I'm actually hearing and learning from the gifting of our community in these smaller groups more than some of the times that I'm gathered in our, all together corporate gathering on a Sunday morning at the building. I'm hearing from more of what the Spirit is doing in your lives and what you're being prompted to do through your gifts. And I think that is a really, it's something to take note of. I think that God seems to be doing something different in these gatherings. It almost reminds me of some of our history of our being a church plant, of gathering in houses, and the things that we learned and grew out of, through these times where we had smaller groups and had more opportunity to proclaim to one another. I don't know if you've had that experience. Does it harken a little bit back for you?
Yeah, for sure. I think it does. And I think this is aside from sort of the fourfold framework, but I think for me in part, it has been, Zoom felt very much like okay, nothing new is happening here. What we want to do is taken away from us. And so let's just make the best of a bad situation and try to get through it, try to survive until we can get back to the way it was before. And, the way the pandemic has progressed, I think has taken even that, it's taken that away from us, which I think was actually not the most faithful response of let's just hunker down and get through. And now a new form that harkens back to some of our earlier forms is yes, there's still some grief of man, there was good things about being all together, but it's also a gift of a new expression in this new time that is not just a loss and a mourning, but it is God is doing something new here. And this is the way God is. Nothing is ever wasted, nothing is lost. And so there's a gift and a flourishing, I think, in some of these smaller gatherings that we can embrace, that it's this is not just a concession that now we're going to get through. Not to say we never want to gather again all together, in the gift of that space, but there's something happening here for this moment, for us, within the time and context we find ourselves in, that is the work of God by the Holy Spirit. And that it's not just a let's get through this, as best we can sort of posture. So I think that's a huge difference in my experience compared to the last couple months as we've been kind of making do on Zoom. This feels beyond making do.
Absolutely. I would totally agree with that. And I think it stands out as one of the more clearer answers to these 4 questions. The last question is it practical? Like, is it logistically possible for us to do it? There's a lot of moving pieces, some requirements from the government about cleaning, about contact tracing. There's some questions about how children can gather and do their discipleship rhythms, which is a big question for us because of social distancing, still mandated regulations, and so there are a lot of complexities in that, and we would have to devote a good amount of resources to being able to answer those questions. And with the flourishing of like these spaces, these backyard gatherings, while the weather holds out, at least I don't know that we want to devote our resources in that way. I would hate for us to miss opportunities of the thing that God is doing to try and solve questions that are not worth solving right now. And they may be coming up, but I just don't know that I am much more captivated by the way that God is doing something in these smaller gatherings. And I think that for me helps me come to terms with the ambiguity in some of the earlier questions and then some of the complexity of the later ones. Yeah. That's where I sort of sit. I think, I'm not sure if you, feel free to add anything that you're thinking about. But I just know that during the summertime too, I love that we have the opportunity to be outside and have some gatherings while the weather holds out. And that might change in the fall. But it's also a sort of spotty time for communities to gather with everybody, being either here or maybe taking a trip and going camping somewhere or something. Like even how many people might end up being there is an organizational component.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe neither here nor there, but it is a piece of it. And certainly travel is less this summer than it has been normal summers for all of us. But I think the bottom piece of this is like, we're going to continue to gather in small groups in backyards through probably the end of August. We're working our way through the minor prophets, and we will reassess at that point as we head into September. As with all of our leadership, like it's open-handed and open to conversation and discussion into it. So we know there's a variety of opinions and kind of needs through the community. But this is how we're gathering sort of our Sunday worship time for the next still 2 months. And so we wanted to explain that so everybody understood, because there's understandably like questions. Can we go back? When will we go back? How are we thinking about this? So this is how we're thinking about it. And, practically, I think we see right now, I would say it's probably about 75% of the community has opted in regularly for these small group gatherings, which means about 25% of our community is not gathering this way. And for some, I know there's a variety of concerns or thoughts there. Some work in jobs that are high exposure and actually, I think, see not participating even in this way as a way of protecting, other people in the community because they feel like they're at higher risk. And so there's a variety of reasons there, and we trust, right, everybody to kind of discern appropriately. And, through house gatherings or triads, there's other means to kind of be still connected to the church as a whole, even in the absence of that. But we would certainly, really strongly just sort of urge or challenge that the folks who have decided to opt out to just think about the worship rhythm in their lives, and and consider like how your life is being shaped. Where is that happening? And one of the gifts of peace is that we have this kind of like open-handed posture where it's like, well, this is how we're discerning where the community is going, but we don't enforce or like coerce, but it's kind of this open-handed, like, okay, discern, like where's the connection to worship, to the community, and so forth. And so hopefully by explaining some of our thinking beyond this, and being open to more conversation, These are uncharted territories. We just want to continue to help as a whole community, us continue to reimagine what it looks like to be faithful to Jesus and our way of life together in this place. And I think that's it. So blessings on you all. Gene and I are both, obviously you have our email and phone number if you want to chat about this more, or have some further questions that or input for us on this particular topic. Peace.
Thank you.